It wasn't a 20th century fox, more like a first century fox. Welcome to Passages. I'm Michael Kegel. What exactly does it mean to look into the future, to prognosticate? What makes the difference between a local prognosticator, somebody on the streets who has a shop, come in and I'll tell you the future, and a prophet? What really constitutes a genuine seer into the future? We're going to look at a text in the Talmud which deals not with a prophet, with a very famous rabbi whom you've probably heard about before, Rabbi Akiva, who lived in the 1st century ACE. He, as I say, wasn't a prophet, but he had the ability in certain instances to actually perceive the future. And the question is whether he looked forward into a separate time, whether it's as simple as that, as seeing a present that is somehow dislocated from the now and is put temporally in the future, or whether somehow he sees more deeply into the present itself, as if the future is actually contained right there and then in the present. Please join us as we look at this interesting incident of Rabbi Akiva in front of the temple, the destroyed temple, with the foxes, or with a fox, with our two guests, Rabbi Benjamin Hecht and Rabbi Mendel Kaplan. Join us after this.
There's a way now of looking at the present differently. In other words, when you first describe the perception of the visionary, the visionary looks into the future. But the point is that's why I'm saying nechamtanu. That's what I was referring to. Is that Rabbi Akiva is that we think of the person living in the future as being over there. What Rabbi Akiva really has done is gotten them to look at the present differently.
And to see good in the present.
Therefore, you're no longer talking visionary in the sense of only living in the future.
Right.
It means that now, now, you're seeing something totally different. All I'm trying to say is that in the Olam of Maisa, in the Olam of action, clearly,
right.
Okay.
And Allah is usually definitive.
Right. There's black and white.
Usually Allah is definitive.
Fine. Okay. Because the fact is, there comes that situation. You're absolutely correct. In the world of thought, then you can live in terms of the world that both these things coexist in the world.
The fact is,
and also how they
you have to live in this world because you make Birchas HaTeira on a halacha and Teira, which is Nidlu v'Gabra, it's not a halacha. And if all you learn is that halacha, you have to make Birchas HaTeira also. It's also Teira Hashem.
Right.
Why? Because in theory, it's all Teira.
I agree with you, but also in the other amendments, in terms of the world of thought, these things coexist. It's gray. It's all worked out that way.
It's
I
not
agree with
gray.
You. It is gray.
It's not gray. It's colorful. It's not gray. Halacha is black and white. It's not gray. It's colorful.
No. Okay, you want to say colorful? That's fine.
It's not gray.
It's multi-dimensional. It's a rainbow.
Multi-dimensional.
It's a rainbow.
And then you have Shem Achar L'Teira. You have Panim L'Teira, which is Panim. Right. Then you have Achar L'Teira, which is Svaras Chatzanius.
Right.
And then you have that which is not Teira at all. People just pushing the Teira.
Right. I understand that. But what I am saying,
believe it or not, they're speaking English.
You do have.
Like, let's go. I gotta go for a class.
What I'm saying also is that you do have.
It's gonna be a show, huh?
Go in here.
It's gotta be a show. All right, let's go.
Deciding his life has to make a decision in Hashkafa as well of what will be his dominant Hashkafa. Okay. You can't have both ways.
Okay, so I'll introduce the Gemara to our public so everybody knows what we're talking about.
Okay.
The Gemara has a discussion prior to this Gemara. I think it's important to put into context. The Gemara talks about some of the prophecies of Moses, prophecies of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, and the Gemara talks about how later prophets reinterpreted what he said so that it was not as harsh and not as stringent. And obviously we understand the prophecy to be coming in from God, emanating from the divine as well. And so it's how things are not always the way they seem to be. And things can be softened and so on and so forth. So I think in the guise of that, or under this influence, the next Gemara begins. And the next Gemara says like this. It says kvar. It already happened, which seems, at least I think to many commentaries, to insinuate this is like almost a continuation. It's being drawn in. So the story of the Gemara is that we have great sages. The greatest sages of Israel are traveling together, and they're going to Rome. And the reason for their going to Rome is because they're being oppressed by the Romans. There are many, many decrees that are going to be set into motion, that are going to hurt people, that are going to maim people. The Roman machination is becoming almost too much to bear. Right. So these great sages, we have Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, we have Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Gamliel. They're going together. Right. And they're in this trip, and they approach, from a distance, they approach Rome. 120 kilometers, the Gemara says. Right. So as soon as they hear all of the tumult and the success, the verdant, palmy Rome, everything is so great in Rome and is so noisy and so boisterous, they begin to weep. They're just crushed. Right. And Rabbi Akiva, he's laughing. So they turn around to him and they say, Akiva, so what are you laughing about? What do you find so funny? He turns around to them and he says, and why are you crying? He says, why are we crying? What kind of question is that? Here you have people that are debaucherous, people that are immoral, libertine people that are interested in themselves only, that engage in all sorts of idolatry and so on and so forth, and they're living it up. Life is great, no problems. And he says, and for us, we were serving God, taking life seriously, was looking for meaning, for content. The Beis HaMikdash, which was our pride and joy, the area in which, so to speak, there was a revelation of God in this world, is burnt. It's called the footstool of God, the Bible calls it, as burnt to the ground. And we shouldn't cry. What kind of question is that? So Akiva says, very well. Lakachani metzachik. That's exactly why I'm laughing, he says. Imagine if these people are having such a good life, imagine how good life is going to be for those who do what they're supposed to do. And then the Gemara tells us there's no response. No response. The Gemara goes into another story. Shuv, a second time, they were approaching the city of Jerusalem. City is a hard word to use. The former city of Jerusalem, the ruins of Jerusalem. This desolate area that was once the crown jewel of Israel. When they come to Mount Scopus, they all rent their garments. This is the halacha. So Rabbi Akiva, along with his friends, all rent their garments together. And then when they reach the Temple Mount, they notice that in the exact area, the exact locality of the Kodesh HaKadosh and the Holy of Holies, the area that nobody was ever permitted to go into, the area where the tablets were kept, they see a fox crawling out of there. A fox has set up a shop. A fox crawling out of his lair. The moment they see this, so they burst into crying. They start weeping. Rabbi Akiva, he bursts into laughter. So they turn around to him incredulous and they say, Akiva, so why are you laughing? How could you laugh now? He says, and why are you crying? He says, why are we crying? This is the spot that the Bible says that no stranger is allowed to approach. And stranger doesn't mean somebody from another country. Stranger means anybody but the high priest. Right. On Yom Kippur. Nobody's allowed to approach. And that's very spot, a fox has set up shop. There's a fox that lives here. It's terrible. So Akiva says, that's why I'm laughing. That's why you're laughing. So he says, there are two prophecies that are tied together. The prophecy of Uriah, which is recorded in the book of Micha, as Tosfos tells us, and the prophecy of Zechariah ben Yevarechiu. And the two prophecies are almost hinged together. He says, why would these prophecies be hinged together? Here's a prophet that speaks in the first era, first temple, and here's a prophet that speaks in the second temple. So why are they hinged one upon the other? So the answer is, he says, the first prophecy, the prophecy of Uriah, speaks of destruction. It says Jerusalem will be plowed. Zion will be plowed like a field. And the other prophecy of Zechariah says that Jerusalem will once again be rejuvenated, and there will be old people, old men and old women that will walk the streets comfortably once again. It will be a very joyous place. So Akiva says, until I have seen the prophecy of Uriah fulfilled in its maximum potency and its full force, I was doubtful. I wasn't sure if the prophecy of Zechariah would come true. But now that I've seen the prophecy of Uriah has come true and been fulfilled, now I'm convinced that one day there'll be a redemption and things are going to be good for the Jewish people and so on and so forth. So here the Gemara says something very interesting. When they hear this, they respond to him. And very rarely does the Gemara point out to the words they use, because Torah Shabbat Peh, the oral Torah, it's not really important, the words. What's important is the content. But the Gemara says, the Talmud says, Beloshon hazeh, in this exact language they responded. Akiva nechamtonu. Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva nechamtonu. Akiva, you have comforted us. Twice. This is the Gemara. Twice. They repeat this twice. Right. And now there are many, many obvious questions. Very enigmatic Gemara. Since I introduced it, I guess I'll let you start to ask the questions.
Well, there's a lot of different places to start with the questioning.
Let's start with the beginning. Let's talk about the things that are difficult to understand, at least in your opinion, and then we'll see what bothers me.
I can say that the aspect of what bothers me is obviously the question of the emotions in the Gemara is one aspect of something interesting that's happening here, and I think it should be important to point out here that when Rabbi Akiva does come to Yerushalayim, he does rend his garments. So he obviously does recognize the sadness.
He does what he's supposed to.
And there's obviously, with rending the garments, there's also out of mourning, so there's obviously a sadness here. So I think that if you read it in terms of him coming there, and then he's happy, it has to be in terms of a balance. There has to be a recognition that there are different emotions that are happening here, and the question is the overriding of those emotions.
Okay.
But there are so many... There's so many details. I mean, we can go through.
But let's share with the audience some basic details
that
we need to.
We can go through various different questions in terms of question. Obviously, one of the questions is does Rabbi Akiva truly need this proof to believe in prophecy?
Oh, obvious question. Rabbi Akiva and the prophet, they don't believe in prophecy. I mean, like, what's going on?
Right. So
not only that, but interestingly enough, the Talmud tells us, the Medrash says this, it's brought in the Talmud, and it's halacha. Maimonides quotes it in halachic context.
Right.
That prophecy, which is negative, bad prophecy, prophets of doom, don't need to happen, because people can always return to God.
Right.
But a good prophecy must be fulfilled. So here's a good prophecy. What's the doubt?
But it's also very interesting in the sense that if you look closely, he says this idea that if he did not have the prophecy of Uriah, he would not having the prophecy of Zechariah. It's an interesting perspective, and it seems that Rabbi Akiva, the point is that if you did not have the prophecy of Uriah, it means you did not see this destruction. Why would that necessarily mean you won't see the eventual redemption? So it seems to imply that this.
Anyway?
It also seems to be something moving forward in terms of some necessity to go down to a certain destructive level in order to go up to the higher level.
You raised an interesting point. You didn't really finish. I don't know if you were going there, but you talked about the fact that there's emotions here in the Gemara. Don't you find that unusual that the Talmud, which is a document that records jurisprudence and law, should suddenly begin to talk about emotions here?
No, I've seen other cases where I have to think off the bat.
So I would say that if there's emotions here, and the Talmud records, there are many stories that happen, but the fact that the Talmud records the story twice, that would seem to tell us not something only about emotions, but maybe there's something here almost intellectually going. There's a philosophical difference.
Clearly, the emotions here are tied to ideas. That's clearly what's happening. In other words, what's happening here is that, and I guess there's an aspect of emotions, and that emotions are basically reflection of how we are to look at what's happening here. So what's happening over here in the Gemara is obviously a way of looking at the world. And the question over here is from what I perceive, is looking at the present vis-a-vis looking at the future. And the question of seeing situations through different perspectives.
I mean, I think what we really need to understand, so yes, we have different perspectives and so on and so forth. Whenever we study Talmud, we need to know what's the theory of the question, you know, what was asked, and what is the idea behind the answer. Like, what's the question and what's the answer? Let's take a look at some of that here, the dialogue. So, they come to a situation where...
I just want to point out there's also the interesting aspect over here, and I think the question is you've pointed out in terms of the last statement, in terms of Akiva Nechamtanu, there's an interesting aspect over here that in the first story, you have three sages having one response, Rabbi Akiva having another response. Do they eventually agree? Do they disagree? Or do they not agree?
To point out.
It's also pointed out in the second one, when it says Akiva Nechamtanu, is there a difference between the emotion of Nechama, i.e. comfort, versus Rabbi Akiva's response of being misachik, of laughing. So the fact is that it seems to be that in terms of this idea, it's always important to recognize that the Talmud does not necessarily always create a homogeneous perspective in terms of the sages. There has to be
everybody does not necessarily agree on it.
So the fact is that
let's go through the dialogue now. They're back and forth. So they're walking and they're coming to Rome. I mean, it's a sad time. They're doing a sad thing. They're on a mission of mercy at the hands of people who are much less than kind and compassionate. And they're weeping. Now, do you have trouble understanding the fact that they're weeping? Do you have trouble with that?
No.
So why does Rabbi Akiva have trouble with it? He's laughing, and they turn around and say, what in the world are you laughing about? So he goes, what are you crying about? What kind of question is that? What kind of question? And he says the same thing later. They see a fox come out of the Holy of Holies. And he starts laughing. They look at him like a lunatic. Say, what are you laughing? He says, why are you crying? we have to understand the question. What do you mean when it says, why are you crying? Why are we crying? Obvious reasons why we're crying.
It's Rabbi Akiva that seems to be the one who's out of sorts. But from Rabbi Akiva's perspective, it seems to be the other people are out of sort.
So we have to understand the two perspectives.
And therefore, it's not only important to understand Rabbi Akiva's perspective, it's to understand how well Rabbi Akiva looked at the world, that he always saw the other perspective as being out of sort.
Right.
And that I agree with you about.
And the other interesting thing is that the story is almost identical. Almost identical. The same thing happens. They see a sad thing. They start crying. Akiva's laughing. One difference. As you pointed out, one difference.
Okay.
The second time, they say Akiva nechamtanu.
Okay.
They don't agree. They say you have comforted us.
Although we have to be clear that there are commentaries that say the Akiva nechamtanu is repeated twice, one on each story. So the fact is that
that's not necessarily so. The Maharsha doesn't learn the way.
But clearly, but there are commentaries who point that out.
However,
it is strange. But the truth is, I would agree with you that the fact that it's at the end of the language here doesn't seem to support that argument.
I would even agree with that argument that it works for both. But the fact is, they don't realize it only after the second story. So what changed?
Right.
What changed?
Clearly.
These are the questions. Let's talk about it. Let's get some of the background over here.
Okay.
The Rebbe talked about this Gemara many times. In fact, very many times. And on one occasion, he said the following. He said, we talked about, say, emotions, and the Talmud has, this emotional ideas and philosophical ideas, but always has halachic ideas.
Okay.
So where's the halachic ideas here?
Okay.
What's the halachic ideas? So he created a very interesting thesis. In the Gemara in Brachas, Rabbi Akiva has a very interesting perspective, also in story form, but it's a halacha. Rabbi Akiva says the words, kol ma, everything. The Avid Rachamana, that the merciful one that God does, Litav Avad.
Right.
Does for good. The famous story of Rabbi Akiva's traveling.
Right.
Today you take traveler's checks at an American Express card, right? Rabbi Akiva takes a donkey to carry his packages, a rooster to wake him up in the morning to say the Shema and pray, and a lantern to study Torah.
Right.
He comes to this village, very unhospitable. They say, get out of here. No room for you. We don't like guests.
Right.
They throw him out of town.
Right.
So he gets stuck up in the hills somewhere. There's Judean hills over there.
Right.
And he makes a little camp for himself, turns his lamp on, he starts studying Torah.
Right.
And everything goes wrong.
Right.
The wind comes and blows the lamp out. The cat eats his rooster. Mountain lion eats his donkey. And he's left penniless, bereft of his possessions.
Right.
What does he say? What's his reaction?
Gamzu L'Tova.
Not faced. He doesn't say Gamzu. Nachum says Gamzu. He says
basically
everything God does for the bed, no problem.
Right.
The next morning, they find out that there was a band of robbers that pounced upon the city, and everybody was murdered, and all the money was taken. And if he had had the animals or his light over there, they would have attracted attention to him. And the safe fate would have befallen him.
Right.
So Rabbi Akiva is a visionary. Rabbi Akiva does not look at life as is now.
Right.
Rabbi Akiva always sees beyond.
Right.
And these are two halachic opinions.
Right.
Many examples. Example of in halacha, in modern day context of halacha, we talk about circumcision. So circumcision is a great mitzvah. On the 8th day, a child is born. You circumcise the child.
Right.
And when do you do that? So the Talmud tells us in Pesachim that a child should be circumcised as soon as possible. Early in the morning. We learned that from Abraham.
Right.
Who was the first one to perform circumcision, that when he had to get up and slaughter his son, he was up early in the morning. Early in the morning. First thing, alacrity, zest. We have to perform mitzvah the same way.
Right.
That's one idea. Another idea within circumcision ceremony is that the ceremony has to be performed amidst pomp, splendor, which means really a large crowd.
Right.
So what happens if there's not so many people that can attend in the morning, and there are more people that can attend the Brit late in the afternoon? It's a Sunday. It's a summer.
Right.
And if work day, not a Sunday, it's a work day. But people come home from work at 5 or 6 o'clock. Sun doesn't set till 8:30. So you'll have a huge crowd, and it'll be a moving experience and a meaningful religious experience, all the wonderful things. What do you do? Two opinions in halacha.
Right.
One opinion says, let's deal with the here and now. It's morning now. You have a child to circumcise. Do what you got to do.
Right.
The other opinion says, no. Let's see beyond.
Right.
You're looking at an immediate good, but I see a greater good. You just have to wait a little bit. So these are two halachic opinions. There are Rabbi Akiva's of the opinion. You have to look further. So we have established first a halachic precedence here in this Gemara. The Gemara is not about a story. The Gemara really is about the philosophies of life. Now let's take a look.
I'm going to interject for a second here. I just want to point out something interesting, because when I studied the Gemara in Brachos about what happened when Rabbi Akiva came to the city and didn't find the thing. So an interesting perspective over there that has always bothered me about that Gemara, in the sense that Rabbi Akiva is thankful for him being saved, but at the same point in time, the city was attacked by the robbers. So at the same point in time, and I want to introduce this idea over here, is that there is three options, and I'm going to point out the three options, because as what I said beforehand in terms of the final conclusion being nechama different than being mesachik, in the sense that there is the one person who only sees today, there's another person who sees the future, and then the person who sees both. And that perspective is a third perspective.
Which the Gemara doesn't really talk about.
Well, I'm not, as I said, I'm not sure.
I mean, there are two opinions here. We have Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva.
Right,
there are clearly two
that's what I'm
classes.
trying to say, that at the end of the Gemara, one of the things that hits me is the statement of Nechama, of comfort, is that a third viewpoint? In other words, there's a viewpoint of, I see what I see today. Okay. Rome is in charge.
Why don't we focus on that? Why don't we let's get to the end.
Well, no, all I'm saying is that I don't want to create a perception of there's the visionary and then there's a person who can't see beyond his nose.
I'm saying that there's it's two real perspectives.
Right. By the way, there are two real perspectives. And the halachic argument you presented, I understand. The halachic argument you presented concerning circumcision is a very real perspective.
It's a real issue.
It's a real issue in halacha.
Yeah.
I understand that because it's A or B. Yeah. But I'm also going to point out that when you think in terms of thought processes, that there's the visionary who sees into the future. There's also the person who is quote unquote pragmatic. He sees the little box he's in right now, the present. And then there's the other option of how you connect the present with the future. And I want to leave that on the table. It's not either or. I just want to leave it on the table as another possibility.
It's on the table.
Good. You see there's 3 oranges on the table.
3 oranges.
Not 1, 2, 3.
Good. I'm not sure if there's 3 ideas. There's definitely 3 oranges.
Okay.
But let's see if there's
We'll see what happens. Let's see.
Okay. They come close to Rome, and all of a sudden they hear singing and dancing and this culture and this life and nightlife. It's wonderful.
Right.
So they start to weep. They start to weep because the moment hits them.
Right.
And Akiva turns around and he says, excuse me, gentlemen. He said, what are you crying for? He doesn't mean why. He knows why they're sad. He's sad too.
Right.
He says, why are you crying now? What made you start crying all of a sudden? Why weren't you crying yesterday? Why weren't you crying an hour ago? Why do you start crying now?
Okay.
Same thing happens in the next story. He said, when they come to Mount Scopus, everybody tears their garments. And it's apparent that Rabbi Akiva also does, as Rabbi Gershom points out, it's a halacha.
Right. Absolutely.
Akiva definitely followed the law. Everybody tore their garments. Everybody.
Right.
But then they come to the Holy of Holies, and they see the fox. Then they start weeping. So they say, why are you laughing? He says, and why are you weeping? Why are you weeping now? You knew, you saw the destruction of the temple. You see Zion is destroyed. You see that the Jerusalem is in ruins. You've seen it all. You already tore your garments and what? Why are you weeping now? What made you start weeping this moment? Okay. So this explains the dialogue, the questions of back and forth. Now, Rabbi Akiva is the visionary, right? Rabbi Akiva is seeing into the future. So they see this great city of Rome and the people who are having such a wonderful life, enjoying Lucalan dinners and everything. I mean, it's just a wonderful life. And they feel terrible about it. And Akiva sees past it. He's not caught up in the moment, he sees past it. He says, if this is people who have an immoral lifestyle, and this is the good that they're able to attain, how much more so that those who are moral and live a contentful life are going to enjoy even better, a greater good. So they're not impressed yet. They're not impressed. They don't react. Why? Because Akiva sees the future, they see the present, and neither is more potent.
What you've defined here is 2 different presents, by the way. What you've defined here is an interesting perspective, in the sense that if they really were seeing the present, there should not have been any difference in their weeping. If they really saw the present for what it was, then the difference of seeing Rome, or the difference of seeing the fox, should not have really caused a difference.
Why? That's the present. That's now. That's the here and now.
But the present is already there. In other words,
the present is there passively, but now it's painted in brilliant colors.
So in a certain
way, it hits you in the face.
In a certain way, but it's still the present going through a change in the present.
It's the now present.
Right.
It's not just the general present. It's this moment.
But the fact is,
the heat of the moment.
Is that the question of why they didn't cry beforehand is perhaps real. You know, it might be real unless they see something different that's occurring over there. In terms of Rome, it's an interesting question. In terms of Rome, what really hit them when they heard about Rome?
They saw this just tremendous.
It was 120 miles.
Prosperity.
No, they heard it. They heard it.
That it should be heard from such a distance says something about it. That's all. It's all about the aura.
Okay.
Now, so they come to the Beis Hamikdash, and here Akiva goes. This is the really strange, enigmatic passage here, because Akiva starts telling them about prophecies. He says, first prophecy, second prophecy, what's the connection? I wasn't sure that Zechariah's prophecy of redemption would come true, and now that I see destruction has happened. And interestingly enough, he chooses a verse of destruction, which is not so bad. I mean, it'll be plowed as a field, not gory, there's no blood. Right. You know, there's nobody's dead. I mean, it's plowed as a field.
Right. And there's also no mention of a fox.
That's correct.
In the sense that the event that he sees is not really
why does that event?
Destruction.
Exactly.
Right.
So here's what the Rebbe says. here, with the second case, they say, Akiva nechamtanu. They say, Akiva, now you're saying something to us. Let's stop for a moment. We're talking about destruction. We're talking about suffering. We're talking about a very hard period of time for the Jewish people. Why does God destroy the Beis HaMikdash? Why do bad things happen? Why do we seem sometimes to take a step back? So there's a very basic Jewish idea that says, Yerida, a descent, is letzorech aliyah. It's for the purpose of an appropriate ascent that follows. Now, essentially, the very, very common metaphor that Chassidus uses is, if somebody had a beautiful house, but could build a Taj Mahal, they'd knock down the beautiful house and build a nicer home. Why? Why? Because it's worth knocking down a nice home to build a beautiful home. The Beis HaMikdash was a wonderful thing. But ultimately, that wasn't the greatest good the Jews could achieve. So therefore, God destroys the Beis HaMikdash. Therefore, there's sorrow. Therefore, there's suffering. Therefore, there's exile. And ultimately, the purpose of all that exile is so that later we take a step backwards to have a greater good.
Right.
You know, I was talking with a friend of mine recently. I said, you leave elementary school, or you leave high school, and you move into the next level in the academic world, and you were the president of the student council, and you were comfortable, and you were happy, and now you're, they're hazing you, they're killing you. You say, like, what's going on? Why do you do it? You don't want to stay in elementary school. Imagine being with gray hair in elementary school. You have to move on. So it's a step backwards, take a step forward. So Akiva tells them, he says, why does it bother you, the heat of them, why does it bother you when you see not only that Zion has been destroyed, that they know already, but they've never seen a fox in the Holy of Holies. They've never seen the area which is, quote unquote, the dwelling place of God, be inhabited by an animal. This is like, it blows their mind. He says, what are you so moved by? Why are you crying? Because you see the intensity of the destruction? You say, yeah. He says, well, doesn't that say something to you? What? He says, I was never doubting that Zechariah's prophecy would come true. But how good or how full would it be? You know, the things will be good. How good? Depends. I'm a prosperous businessman. How well are you doing? I made $1 million this year. That's prosperous. I made $50 million. It's a different. There's good and good. So Akiva says, I knew there was going to be redemption. What's the verse he quotes? There's going to be old men and ladies walking in the street. Sounds like Bakers to me, but I go, wonderful, you know, how exciting. So he says, I read this verse, you know, okay, it sounds nice, peaceful, you know, everybody's happy, everybody's living a sort of a slow, easygoing lifestyle. But now that I've seen that the destruction is absolute, so much absolute that there are foxes in the Holy of Holies, and now I know that the redemption is not just going to be break-rest. It's not just going to be an easygoing environment, but that it's going to be wonderful. Because if it doesn't get really bad, it doesn't have to get really good. The step backwards has to be enough to move us forward. I take one step backwards, I got to jump 2 feet. I take 20 steps backward, I got to jump 40 feet.
But I'm going to say something else. So you see, what I'm going to throw in, and this is where I get into the fact of the Nechamtanu, is that there's a way now of looking at the present differently. In other words, when you first describe the perception of the visionary, the visionary looks into the future. But the point is that's why I'm saying nechamtanu. That's what I was referring to. Is that Rabbi Akiva is that we think of the person living in the future as being over there. What Rabbi Akiva really has done is gotten them to look at the present differently.
And to see good in the present.
Therefore, you're no longer talking visionary in the sense of only living in the future. It means that now, now, you're seeing something totally different.
So what happens to the first story? The first story, they don't react. They don't react. But the second story, because they
but that was my point when I threw out the 3. My point is that the original sense of misachek is that I'm already living there. Like,
it doesn't make a difference to me. It's good for them. It'll be much better for you.
Fine. So, but that was my point. That's why I'm referring to Nechama.
That's why I said I wanted to get to the Nechama.
Okay, fine. But that's why Nechama represents, to me, an aspect of looking at the future. And it's something interesting because I wanted to look around at the word Nechama today in terms of comforting the mourner, which is a classic. What's the perception of comforting a mourner? So the fact is that what you do when you comfort a mourner is you don't go up to a mourner and say simply, you know, that, I mean, you could argue that the soul is in a better place and so forth, or eventually you know, this will be great and we'll be
someday we'll all be together.
You're right. But the fact is
That's
you
rhetoric.
deal with
somebody
what's
is dealing
today.
with pain of loss.
Right, you deal with today, and the Nechama is basically a connection of present and future. Rabbi Yoshe Rabbi Soloveitchik makes an interesting point about the whole concept of the Nechama. in the sense that what he argues about is that in a velus or in a ninus, in the stage before burial, from death to burial, that he argues that a person does not do positive commandments. He's not to do positive commandments. So he basically says that this reflects the total destruction of the human being. In doing a commandment, you are basically maintaining human dignity. That death is basically confronting the defeat of the human being. Therefore, mitzvos are not done because mitzvahs really represent the greatness of human beings. So therefore, you confront the defeat of the human being. But with burial, you start the healing process. You start then returning back to a level of being a human being through reintroduction in the community, through the process of avelus and so forth and so forth. So the process of nechama is really a process of connecting. It's basically saying over time we want to basically be. That's why in the concept of having the kind of suffering of avelus of mourning after the year is considered to be incorrect. There's an idea of there's pain now. In the future, you have to be able to move on. But I'm saying it's a present, future connection.
I don't really think, though, that the idea of nechama, which means comfort, is necessarily homogeneous in the sense that the comfort, the divine comfort that God is supposed to offer us, and the human comfort that we're supposed to offer a fellow human being when they're going through different. I don't think it's one and the same.
But I think
comfort is a different idea.
But I think it's connected.
I think that the comfort of human beings comfort each other by commiserating with each other, but to show you that I care too. Because we can't replace anything. It's very interesting. You talked about it. We'll deviate for a minute, but we'll stick on this idea of nechama. They tell a story that I heard somewhere in the early 60s. They were talking about the expression that's used in a mourner's home. You say, God hamakom, a place. God, the source of place, comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion. So somebody said, why is it we refer to God as the place? It's very rarely referred to as the place. God is the source of place. There's one place in the Haggadah, but it's very rare. So somebody said the Lubavitcher Rebbe would probably have an answer to that question. And about 20 minutes later, the Rebbe walked into the Shiva house. So they said, isn't that funny, Rebbe? We were just talking about you. So he said, so what do you say? He said, why? So the Rebbe said something very interesting. He said, when a person dies, they leave a vacant spot. There's a void. Who can fill the void that's left when a person is taken from this world? Only God, the source of all place. But ultimately, that reflects back to what I'm saying. That the nechama,
I want you to say
the nechama that we offer each other is not the God's nechama.
But I'm going to say something else. The statement is hamakim lachem etchem, that God should provide comfort to you with the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. So the fact is why do you connect this personal mourning to the mourning of Zion and Jerusalem? So what I want to say is that's what I'm trying to say over here is that in a certain way, our whole process, if you look at the present as part of the pathway to the future, and that's really what the whole movement is from Galus to Geula, from exile to redemption, is that looking at the present as part of the pathway to the future. And that's what I'm trying to present over here, in the sense that when we look, let me put this out. When we look too close, when we jump ahead too fast to the future, it's been unfortunately in Jewish history, anytime we jump too fast to the future, I'm thinking in terms of, let's say, Shabtai Tzvi or Jacob Frank or whatever, when we jump too fast to the future, right, and we're already thinking future, we miss it. The point is, it's a whole
the present. That's a given.
And the concept of Mashiach, the concept of looking in terms of the future, is to look at the present along the pathway to the future.
Our job is to ask God, not to inform Him when Mashiach comes.
Well, but the fact, no, our
job is not to inform God. Hey, God, by the way, Mashiach is here.
Our job is basically to work towards
a Messiah. That's brought about by God.
Wait.
We're flying all over the place.
No, but I'm
trying to get back to our Gemara.
I'm just saying, but the fact is that looking at the present as part of the pathway to the future.
Earlier, we have two perspectives. Rabbi Akiva posed it that there's a future, and they pose it that there's a present, and that's it. There's no agreement. Each question was answered. He said, why are you crying? I explained to you why I'm crying. Okay, I hear you have an opinion. Thank you. Why are you laughing? I explained to you why I'm laughing. They don't chide him anymore for why he's laughing, but there's no agreement. Here, all of a sudden, there's agreement, but I think you're right that there isn't full agreement. You see, halachically, they are still people that would rule, and this, by the way, can be proven. It's interesting to note. The Rebbe point this, a fascinating thing, very interesting to note, that we don't say Rabbi Akiva v'hazkenim. Rabbi Akiva and the elders are walking. Because what difference does it make who they were? There's a Gemara in Hurriya says Rabbi Tarfon and there's a Kenim.
Right.
Really, the spotlight's on Rabbi Akiva. He's shining tonight. He's the one who's making statements. He's the maverick. He's unorthodox. He's doing the unusual things. It's not relevant to say Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua. However, if you take a careful look throughout the entire Talmud, you'll find that Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Yeshua are all of the opinion, halachically, present. And Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion, future. So anyway, they have two opinions there. Two halachic opinions. They agree to disagree. They respect each other and they go on.
But
However,
that's what my point was. My point is that in the conclusion...
Let me finish. Now we're going to get into the conclusion. However, here it doesn't say that they changed their minds. It says, Akiva, we're converts. That's it. Now we're going to become visionaries of the future. We're not looking at the present. They don't say that. What they say is, Akiva nechamtonu, Akiva nechamtonu. They say it twice. Why did they say it twice? The Medrash says, there's another time, we use the same with the Marsha. Famous Rabbi Marsha says about these words, double words, Akiva nechamtonu, Akiva nechamtonu, Akiva, you have comforted us, Akiva, you have comforted us. So Marsha says, you know why he says it twice? That's a common expression you find elsewhere. In fact, there's a biblical expression of consolation. It's a Haftorah, special reading that we read the week after Tisha B'Av, the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, and God says, comfort, comfort my people, 2 times. So the Medrash says, why does it say comfort, comfort twice? Why do you say comfort once? You get the message, we're not thick. So the answer is that Loku b'kiflayim, they suffered doubly, there was a double suffering, and therefore there will be a nechama b'kiflayim, there'll be a double salvation, or a double comfort and redemption. What are they saying here when they're saying Akiva nechamtonu, Akiva nechamtonu? It's very important to point out that the Gemara, the Talmud tells us, Beloshon hazeh. These words, very rare, because the key to understanding this very strange, mysterious, and enigmatic Gemara is in the fact they say it twice. Because they say nechamtonu, nechamtonu alludes to that biblical reference where the Jews suffered twice. And because the suffering was double, a double suffering, doubly as intense, that's why we're comforted. Because you have shown us that the fact that things look really bad, that itself shows that things will be really good. He's shown them delight in the present.
But you see, the point is...
1 second, it doesn't say they agree after. It says you comforted us.
But the fact is...
They still remain of their same opinion.
But the fact is that's what I'm saying. In terms of the present, and I would say the present in terms of the Jewish perspective, those people who talk in terms of the present, it's not a present in terms of an absence of future. It's looking at the present along the line of the future. Correct. And that's exactly what I said in the end.
But they don't agree. They still don't agree.
They don't agree because Rabbi Akiva is much more of the visionary in the sense that Rabbi Akiva is seeing always. That's why in certain ways Rabbi Akiva almost lives in the future. In the sense that, when you think in terms of the Gemara, in terms of brachas, where his perception of looking at things as good is in a certain way. If you look in terms of looking at things that are good, we sometimes say you look at certain things that happen to you that are negative, and say it's good because it teaches you something. You say it's good because God is directing you some way or so forth. Rabbi Akiva went right to the good. Right. He said it was good. I had right away. Right. Fine. Right. So the truth is that the other way of looking at good, that's something bad happens. It's along the future.
Not related to this, but I'm going to disagree with you because there's another expression in the Gemara that says Rabbi Akiva says everything God does it for the good is futuristic. Right. Nachum Ish Gamzu, who's another figure, very colorful figure in the Talmud, and he paraphrases it differently. He doesn't say God will do good. Right. He says it's good now. Right, but you see he's very different than Rabbi Akiva.
But that case of Rabbi Akiva is very strong.
Let's take a look at those two cases. Right. In Rabbi Akiva's case, was there a loss?
Clearly it was a loss. Right.
His lantern blew out. He didn't have a place to sleep. His rooster was eaten. His donkey was eaten. But Nachum Ish Gamzu, just we'll share with the audience a story, is sent also on one of these missions of mercy to try to intercede on behalf of the Jewish population with the Roman government. And they levy this tax and they collect every penny, squeezing blood out of a rock. The people had no money, every penny they could get together, and they bring tribute. A box of tribute, gold, silver, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, whatever it may be. And he stays over a night in an inn, and the innkeeper says, would you like to put your stuff in a safe? And he says, oh, thank you, so kind of you. So they put it in the safe. But the unscrupulous innkeeper goes in the middle of the night and exchanges the rubies, diamonds, gold, and silver for earth, for stones and earth. And the next morning, he opens his box. I mean, try to put yourself in these shoes. He has the weight of the entire Jewish people. The future is on his shoulders. The success of his mission is literally life and death. Not one, thousands of lives. He's failed. How? He doesn't turn around and say, oh, whatever God did, it will eventually be for the good. He says, this is good. Oh, this is great. Takes his box and goes. Doesn't think twice. I mean, the faith there is tremendous, unbelievable. Comes to the Roman emperor and presents his tribute. Okay, open the tribute, open this big fancy box. This is, earth, stones. The emperor wants to kill him. He says, this is making a mockery of me, this Jew. Kill him! All of a sudden, miraculously, Elijah appears dressed as one of the king's ministers. He says, you know, these Jews, they come from a man whose name was Abraham. And I remember reading in the Bible, there's a story about Abraham and dirt. That when Abraham went to fight the 4 kings, the 5 kings, the First World War, so he was throwing the dirt, and it turned into arrows. You think the Jews would bring you dirt? What do you really think he's insane? King says, you have a point. Why would he bring me dirt? So there was Rome happened to be in the midst of a battle. They send the dirt there, turns into arrows. So Rabbi Akiva only sees the future. He says, whatever God did will be for the good. Nachum Ish Gamzu says, it's good. You know why? Because if he would have come with gold and silver, the Roman emperor would have said, gold and silver, I have a lot of gold and silver. But you want to give me something miraculous? Ah, this is special. And he succeeded.
But I mean, what I'm saying is you're right, Rabbi Akiva is saying it will be good, but he's already enjoying it now.
How is it that a person lives in the future in the present? I'm thinking of, there's a lehavdil, as we say, to differentiate, right? Nietzsche, there's a famous German philosopher named Nietzsche who spoke of himself as a posthumous man. He said in his writings, because he knew that he was living 100 years ahead of his time. And in some ways he was. In some ways he predicted the future, right? And he says, I'm a posthumous man. And in fact, he wasn't as successful in his lifetime as he was when he was dead. Like a lot of artists, like Van Gogh, right? Van Gogh, how much money did Van Gogh make in his lifetime? I think he made $10 or something. And the most expensive painting is Van Gogh. Now, how is that different from someone like Rabbi Akiva? Right, because in a sense, Nietzsche and Van Gogh are tragic figures. Right? They're saying, I'm a genius.
I'm a genius. There's no comparison.
Oh,
because Rabbi Akiva,
I'm comparing
says, he doesn't look at himself. He doesn't say, look at me, I'm so cool, I'm going to be. Rabbi Akiva says that I see in everything God does ultimate good.
I understand, but the point is to contrast, not to compare, right? Compare and contrast. Obviously, there's a contrast here.
Okay,
the contrast is that one of them is a tragic hero, one of them sees...
No, I think what's happening over here, I think your point over here is correct. Excuse me, you can come back. Okay, I think what the point is that I think your point is well taken. There's a difference between what Nietzsche's talking about in terms of himself versus the idea of a whole way of looking at the world of a Rabbi Akiva looking at the world.
It's all about God's world. It's God's world.
But what you're talking about here is, and this is in some ways the interesting aspect about the Jew. There's an article we once published called "The Jew in History," written by I forget the name of the author now, unfortunately, but. The fact is
just brought redemption to the world.
Okay, but the fact is that
when you say
I know,
teaching in the name of somebody.
I know, but that's true. I think his name was Abramson. Okay. But I think the fact is that there's an interesting aspect that in many ways, Jews throughout history, throughout the ages, never really did history. Right? There's not that many historical books written by Gedolim, by our scholars or whatever. We really never really, more in the last few hundred years we've done history, but for many, many years we weren't people who really recorded history. Now we have a few things in history, but really not that much. Not that much. We really don't have people recording history. Okay, you really don't have the Gedolim writing their memoirs or what happened, or people recording. This is what the Ramban did. This we have some things. Okay, we have some. Okay, let me put it like this. In many ways, the Jew does not just live in history. The Jew lives in what I refer to as the moment that connects all of history. Like the example, Rav Yoshe Ber talks about when he's sitting and learning, he feels that the Rambam's in the room with him. We say Rashi says. We don't say Rashi said. We say he says that when he's learning. He feels the Rambam's there, and then the Ravid walks in. Other scholars. Famous article. So the fact is that we live in a certain perspective of time where past, present, and future in a certain way collected together. And I think in many ways, and this is perhaps it is that really what's happening here is that type of connection. How do you connect the past, the present, the future in certain ways? And maybe Rabbi Akiva obviously sees the present. He rends his garment. And the others. It's an aspect where there's a present and there's a past. Which is dominant? How does it work? But the issue is that way that we, as a I don't want to say as a people, but as a methodology in Torah, recognize that eventually there's an eternity, there's an eternal aspect to our existence along this path, which we call history, which really has to combine all of it together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really disagree with what you're saying. I'm just saying what
I think that there's a difference between the two.
To put the words into the Gemara into context here,
Right.
to put it into a very, very simple context. What happens here is that there are two opinions that are being expressed.
Right.
And in the first story, there are two opinions. They respect each other, but there are two opinions. They remain two opinions.
Right.
In the second story, what happens is that the second opinion, the opinion of those who are living in the present, who say, fox in the Holy of Holies.
Right.
Say, city of Rome.
Right.
So high and palmy. It breaks the heart.
Right.
They've learned to appreciate Rabbi Akiva's perspective. He's in the sense that he was able to comfort them. It doesn't say they changed their mind. They continue to look. Their perspective on life was primarily present focused.
Right.
Rabbi Akiva's perspective was primarily future focused. As I said in the
primarily.
Yes. In
Yeah.
Torah, nobody ever disagrees fully, and we always have a little bit of. It was always a little amalgamation.
The only reason Rabbi Akiva can comfort them is because they see in the present.
Right. Well, that's the difference in the second story and the first story. In the first story, he gives them this idea. In the second story, he says, "Look, you see a fox? That means the prophecy of evil."
Future in the present, and
the prophecies hinge on each other.
You're correct also.
Descent
Rabbi
leads
Akiva,
to an essence.
Right, but that's it. Future in the present, and Rabbi Akiva's rendering of the garment says that even in the future, there's a present.
Furnishings for passages have been provided by Gencor, located at 342 Queen Street East, Toronto.
The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said of himself in his writings that he was a posthumous man, by which he meant that his brilliance was so profound and so great that nobody would really appreciate him in his lifetime, that he was essentially living out his life as a dead man. In some ways, a lot of geniuses are precisely these types of individuals, people who are living in the present with us, and yet in another sense, are living in another present, a present which is contained within this one as a possibility. And for some, for the real geniuses, as an actuality. And this perhaps was the case with Rabbi Akiva. I hope you enjoyed our discussion today on the foxes in the temple. Please join us next week. Peace and blessings to you all.